could just de-electrify, no pens, relax, listen. This is a passage from Sri Aurobindo. It's only 1 page long. And I'm trying to think when he wrote it. It would have been probably in the 20s, I'm not certain. And I don't know exactly what it refers to, so we will take it to refer to us. And we may be right in doing so. We'll see. Okay. There are moments when the Spirit moves among human beings and the breath of the Lord is abroad upon the waters of our being. There are others when it retires and people are left to act in the strength or the weakness of their own egoism. The first are periods when even a little effort produces great results and changes destiny. The second are spaces of time when much labor goes to the making of a little result. It is true that the latter may prepare the former, may be the little smoke of sacrifice going up to heaven, which calls down the rain of God's bounty. I'm skipping a long section. But being pure, this is now the exhortation. But being pure, cast aside all fear, for the hour is often terrible, a fire and a whirlwind and a tempest, a treading of the winepress of the wrath of God. But he or she who can stand up on it and the truth of his or her purpose shall stand. Even though he or she fall, they shall rise again. Even though they seem to pass on the wings of the wind, they shall return. Nor let worldly prudence whisper too closely in your ear, for it is the hour of the unexpected. We'll just have silence for a minute, please. Okay, thank you. Which reminds me to say that if you come to the door and you see us silent, please wait till we're finished, okay? I'm very eager to meet you all. Some of you I've met, but I'll meet again. But I'd like to do that in the second half, okay? And I'd like to lecture in the first half to get us into the material, because that's what we've come. We've come for sociability, of course. We've come for each other. That's very significant. But also, I want to make it clear that we have a lot of important ideas to consider. So I'm going right in, okay? And I will do that whenever I lecture, which is about 3 times, okay? And I will do it in all the courses I give. And other people do it differently, and that's fine. Okay, so...
I think the door is locked.
Door's locked.
So they can't come in.
That is excellent, Ellen. Okay, you will have to sit here on the side a little bit. And there's one here.
There's a chair here.
And you will need a... Yeah, this is okay, yeah. I won't ask you any questions. Okay, come. And... no. Yeah, you can take this one. And I can't... Oh, yes, I can, yeah. There we go. Okay, so if this were just an introduction, time out. Do you want the lights on?
Yeah. What's a good?
Try it. Better or worse? This is like the eye chart, right? Better or worse? Too dark.
Yeah,
That's okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Emerson. I was counting on you. Okay, so you're the only one to respond to this. Okay, so if this were only an introduction to PCC, which it could be, I would probably speak about Rick Torrance's book, Passion of the Western Mind, or a couple of Brian's books, right? Hidden Heart of the Cosmos, or the University Queen Dragon, or The Universe Story, or some other books. But since you are new, not only to PCC, but to CIIS, except for some of our guests who are here, I'm not going to introduce now, but I will later. I would like this as well to be an introduction to CIIS, which I hope will soon be CUIS, California University of Independent Studies. I hope we have your approval. So I'd like to begin by referring to the passage that I just read, which I read for several purposes. One of them being to introduce the idea of lost cause, or commitment to a cause that without immediate positive result, something long-term, something, etc., that you do for an ideal, even though in the moment it might not seem practical. But sometimes the most ideal turns out to be the most practical, and the most practical or expedient and pragmatic might turn out to be counterproductive or unimportant. I'm not saying it's always so, but that's one of the hard things to figure out, is when it is so. Okay? So this is a program which is very big picture and long term. All right? So I have invited Audra to talk about career, because to affect the long term, you have to solve some short-term problems. So we're trying to do several things at once. One is to develop a big picture. Another is to look ahead to the long term, which you can only do adequately if you look back to the long term. And the other one is to keep our eye out for some short-term combinations, solutions, steps, etc. All right, so I'd like to give you a little bit of an introduction to the long history of this institution, which I think some people think of as not having a long history because it's only 45 years old. So therefore it's true compared to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown. Stanford's not so old. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown is very old, and Amherst and some other places, they are very old. And this is, relatively speaking, not very old, and it's not really a good, practical idea to start a graduate school ever. Really not a good idea. Okay. You need millions of dollars, and this school didn't have millions of dollars. So what did happen? Let me tell you that. First off, I think it's interesting, maybe even important, that the first school, what's here called the American Academy of Asian Studies, you don't have to look, it was founded by a businessman, an importer, not particularly well educated, living here in San Francisco, and going back and forth to Asia with fruits and nuts. And noticing that American business people who in the 1940s and 1950 were almost all men, so he would say businessmen, and it would be accurate. And he noticed that they were really not very good at dealing with their Asian counterparts. And so he decided to start a graduate school that would prepare people for international business. All right, very enterprising. And he made an agreement with the University of the Pacific in Stockton, all right, to be a program, an accredited program there. And he wanted his own board, and he wanted representatives from all the Asian countries to send a representative. So it would be a board basically of business and political people, all right? And the curriculum would be teaching Americans about Asia so that they could be more effective and less embarrassing. Okay. And so in 1950, he went to a very distinguished, very European professor of Sanskrit, ancient Indian language, which you all know something about, and at Stanford, and asked for help, and that was Frederick Spiegelberg, and he said, yes, I'll come and help. And Spiegelberg, who was a disciple of Sri Aurobindo, whose name I hope you will now become very familiar with if you're not already. And he then wrote to Sri Aurobindo in, I've just hit a bump, because Gainsborough only went to Spiegelberg, I thought, in 1950, in Aurobindo. It must have been in 1950 before Sri Aurobindo died on December 5th. Past the bump. So he wrote to Sri Aurobindo, and Sri Aurobindo might or might not have paid attention. He might have given it to his secretary and said, take care of this. In any case, they didn't ask, Spiegelberg didn't ask for Haridas Chaudhuri. He asked for a man named K.D. Setna, but K.D. Setna, his wife, didn't want to leave the Pondicherry ashram to go to America. And so, however it happened, they then, somebody wrote to a young professor in his early 40s, and said, how would you like to go to America to join a group of people starting a graduate school in East-West studies? And Haridas said yes, sailed to America in 1950, while Sri Aurobindo was still alive, until December 5th. And he then came and joined Frederick Spiegelberg, Louis Gainsborough, who was paying for the whole thing, but didn't actually know how graduate school worked, and Alan Watts, who was an Episcopal priest at Northwestern University, and not so happy in that role, and he was glad to come out to San Francisco, which was just emerging as the center of everything that he was interested in, certainly. And so it was those three, plus there was a Buddhist bishop and a couple of other people, and they started the school, part of the University of the Pacific. All right. And it went along for about 4 or 5 years. Haridas Chaudhuri was beloved by everybody. I happen to know because I talked to Spiegelberg. I didn't speak to Alan Watts, who died in the 70s. But I did get to know Louis Gainsborough. Of course, I got to know Haridas Chaudhuri, and it was a very hard time. They did not get along. They did not appreciate that Louis Gainsborough was basically ruining his business and depleting his small fortune. Alan Watts wanted to do what Alan Watts wanted to do. Frederick Spiegelberg only wanted to show up when Frederick Spiegelberg wanted to show up. And the only guy who was sort of carrying the can and chopping wood was Haridas Chaudhuri. Now, there's an excellent website, summary or history, I guess, of this period on David Ulansey's website. You don't have to write it because it's on your page, describing it all. Only part that seems to me inaccurate, but I may be wrong, is that I was told by Louis Gainsborough and Frederick Spiegelberg and Michael Murphy that basically the thing blew up and dissolved in the mid-50s. But David reproduces, perhaps because he knew my opinion, reproduces a little brochure showing that there were some courses up until 1968, which really surprises me. But anyway, that's something for you to research, or not. So I'm thinking that it kind of dissolved and was a lost cause. Louis Gainsborough moved to Los Angeles in a fit, which he was still sort of carrying around with him when I visited him in 1991. And Spiegelberg went back to Stanford. Alan Watts stayed around and became a celebrated speaker guru guy. And there are a dozen films, in fact, all of which I've seen, where he talks in this beautiful mellifluous voice non-stop about meditation, and basically it's called Buddhism, but it's really Taoism. Okay, so then in 1968, Haridas Chaudhuri and his wife Bina, who was not a tag-along, but a very significant person, particularly administratively, she was quite tough and very smart. They no, they didn't. They founded the, what they call the California Institute of Asian Studies. Took me a second because the names have changed several times. California Institute of Asian Studies, and he told me himself that they did not keep the charter that was part of the University of Pacific, even though they could have asked for it away. They wanted, and Haridas is an alert, spiritually alert person, so he and Bina made a deed, right? They went to the Attorney General of the state of California and said, we are starting a new institution with a new spiritual mission, all right, with himself as the head. Now, I take seriously this idea that institutions with ideals have biographies. They have an inner life like a person does. No, it's not, we're not just how we change from year to year and cells to cell. We also have an enduring, continuous self. And Haridas surely thought that. In fact, I can tell he did, because he said that he went and started a new institution with a new leadership, and a new sacrificial gesture. Okay? And that was in 1968, just a few months before the celebrated Summer of Love in San Francisco. And if you don't know, Summer of Love in San Francisco was mostly about drugs, rock and roll, and peace and love. The one in Berkeley, it's only a short BART ride, well, there was no BART then. The one in Berkeley was political, and it had quite a different personality then as now. Okay, so this was in San Francisco, and so this institution that I'm speaking about, of which we are the beneficiaries, came from, not from the one in Stockton, but from the house on 3rd and Fulton, a handsome brick house called Cultural Integration Fellowship, where quite a few of the CIIS faculty lecture. I lecture there twice a year. Joe Subiando usually does. What do I think of it? Pansy, Rick O'Brien, I've shown a little bit there lately. But anyway, we're always invited to lecture on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. It's a nice place to go sometime, though you might find it's a little tired in some ways, but it still is important in some other ways. Okay, so out of that institution, which was an ashram, all right, it was not accredited anything, they founded a graduate school to be accredited, which I knew from Haridas that that's what he wanted. He wanted an accredited graduate school. I don't think he was thinking about the fact that all of us who are in higher education must think about, namely that students can't get loans if you're not accredited. This is the deal breaker. If you're a very poor school with a few students and you really don't want to have accreditation, you can tough it out, but your students won't be able to get loans. So that's big. Okay, which is why everybody tries to get accreditation, though it costs a fortune to get accreditation. Okay, so we are at the point where that's what they did, that's what they wanted, and maybe in 1968, maybe 50 students came. I once saw a brochure for 1970 maybe, that had 28 programs, probably not many more than 28 students, maybe 56, 2 students per program. And when I visited Haridas in 1970, it was on a house on the corner of 21st and Dolores. The whole school was there, including the library, and Haridas and Bina didn't live there, but Rena Sakar, who was invited by Haridas, lived there, and Ann Tyke, who works outside of Joe Subiando's and Judy's office, right? She lived there, and so the school really started there. And then, horribly, Haridas Chaudhuri died at his desk with he and Bina were going to dinner with Michael Murphy and Michael's wife Dulcie, and they were waiting out in their car, and didn't come. They went upstairs, and Haridas had a heart attack and died, and it really looked like over for the school, since nobody else was a spiritual teacher, philosophical writer, a charismatic person, and beloved of the San Francisco Renaissance, he was really an interesting, important person, and end of that, terrible, terrible, and what do? And so Bina begged Frederick Spiegelberg to come back and be the interim president. Well, interim lasted 3 years, but it didn't exactly kill him because he only came for 3 hours a week. And he loved Haridas and Bina, but he didn't really want to administer a scruffy graduate school. All right, so that went on then from 1975 to around 78, for which time they hired another president named Ted Vestal, who had a job in India, as I know because I was there, gathering some materials for teaching India in American high schools, like, you know, samples of what things look like. And so he was in some respects okay, in some respects it wasn't a perfect fit. And it was hard, it was very, very hard. There was no money, no prestige, no accreditation, nobody could get loans, etc. And then in 1978, actually come to think of it, that's at the beginning of Ted Vestal's presidency, Ralph Metzner, whose name I hope you know, had already come in 1976 as the dean of not very much. And Ralph had been to Harvard, been to Oxford, and then he'd been to Harvard PhD, and he was a very, very close friend of Timothy Leary, and there's a great book called, I think it's good, The Psychedelic Club, which tells about Leary, etc. We won't talk about him, and Ram Dass, who then was, Richard Alpert became Ram Dass, and Houston Smith was there as a student, as was Winston, son of Harry Winston, the jeweler, who's the one who ratted on Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary, who were Harvard faculty, and told the president that these guys were giving LSD to students. Big deal. It's a whole big complicated thing about gay lovers and betrayal and jealousies, and nobody can walk really well. Though I think maybe Ralph does. Okay. They had these summer things with Leary, who was then married to the Nana, who became Bob Thurman's wife, and Medway, a big house in upstate New York, and it's wild and also dramatic. They're making breakthroughs. They're making deep alliances and broken alliances, and it couldn't be more dramatic. Okay, so Ralph then came to be the dean, but Ralph wasn't just interested in exploring the limits of consciousness, which of course he was, and did it all of his life and is still doing it, but he also, he'd been to Harvard and he really believed in learning, and he wanted this to be a good graduate school. So one of the things you can watch for, now that you're here, is these two things that don't always go well together. In fact, they mostly don't, but we're trying to keep them together. Something on one side, let's call it spiritual or non-ordinary, and the other side, not so spiritual and perfectly ordinary. And how do you... So there was a tension from the beginning. Okay. Now, in 1978, Ralph by himself, certainly no help from Frederick Spiegelberg, wrote the WASC document. You have to write a big document saying, describing your courses, and who's on the board, who's on the faculty, how much money do you have, etc., etc. But at this time, WASC wasn't that difficult, to tell you the truth. So he wrote this big document, and in 1978, and then the WASC, he dealt with WASC. This is the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, of which there are 6 regions in the United States. So a lot of you come from the East Coast, your school is accredited by Middle States, or maybe New England, Central, whatever. Okay. So the team, 5 people came and the first hour of the team visit is to meet with the president, and that's when sort of they exchange, what are your problems, and how are things going, and are you going to be able to make it, and etc. And they knocked on the door of Frederick Spiegelberg, and he came to the door. I was surprised he was even there, and he said, you have no business to be here, you will leave immediately. So that was the end of that application for another 3 years. At which time Ralph wrote again, and this time was 78, 81. Still the same president, but Spiegelberg was out of the picture. So clearly now I'm thinking that Spiegelberg must have still been here, and Ted Vestal would have been not yet here, 78. Okay. So the WASP came, and it wasn't that hard, and they had a guy named Mohanty, who was an Indian philosopher and very sympathetic, and he convinced everybody these are really good people, we need East-West, give them a break, and we got accreditation. And then people could get loans, the enrollment went up. Not dramatically, but went up. And then it was kind of a steady. I would do anything for a glass of water. It's really for their sake as well, because I'm going to start sputtering. Okay. I brought water and it leaks. My brand new Metropolitan water bottle. Okay, so they were then accredited and things started to get better. Then in 1983, they hired a person who really should have been president, a professor of Indian anthropology at the University of Michigan, named John Broomfield, and he was here for 7 years. And he and Ralph worked pretty well together and really improved the academic quality of maybe 100, 150. When I came in 1990, there were 300 students. So there was some growth, steady, okay, and accredited. It really looked like something. And at the same time, there was a promising school of consciousness at JFK. Actually, it was a tiny bit of JFK, but it got a lot of attention in this world where we're interested in consciousness. But really, there was a law school and all kinds of other stuff at JFK that had nothing to do with the consciousness school, but still they did have that program. And then there was Saybrook, which was teaching at a distance all through the 70s and 80s, but a little bit transpersonal, but not so transpersonal. It seemed transpersonal because they had Stanley Krepner, who was super duper senior elder transpersonal. And then there was ITP, Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, which was founded by people who really were transpersonal. All right, and they've had a steady history, a little bit like competitive. Thanks so much. A little like competitors to us, but also friendly, because a lot of people are teaching in both places. Okay. Thanks. Pacifica and near Santa Barbara was not yet on the horizon, so it was those places. I used to meet with the presidents of those three. The presidents of these small places, we called small presidents, and we were always talking about how we could combine. But in truth, when the time came, nobody put any money on the table. So we just kept talking, which is good because we didn't join with anybody, and now we're the only tree standing because the others are all been bought up by somebody else, and they're all going fast. Sad story. Okay, so 1983, like that, and then John Broomfield came to the end of his contract. I won't go into that. And then so I was offered the job in 83, and we didn't want to come, my wife and I, because school was actually crazy. And it's actually not at all an exaggeration, and not nice. Which is an interesting thing about spiritual. It's actually an interesting thing. How many spiritual institutions do you know that the people are not nice? Interesting. Okay. Elizabeth McCormick, my dear friend, who was chair of our board, used to go out. We used to go to dinner after the board meeting, and on Lawrence Rockefeller's budget, and she often said, all faculties are the same. She was once chair of Middle State. She knew where else she was speaking, except when they're spiritual. Then they're much worse. There's something to it. Maybe we'll talk about in the second half. Okay, so I was then offered the job in July. I had this. Do you ever have that two things at once? At some place in your inner life, you say yes, and everything else around you, like, do you really want to work with those people? Says no, or something like that. That kind of conflict. It's really a level conflict. It's not left hand, right hand. It's like, you know. And my wife certainly didn't want to come, and I couldn't blame her. And then my dear friend Elizabeth McCormick, who had hired me to teach philosophy when I was just a tiny boy, and then went to work for Lawrence Rockefeller, and was a big shot by the time, etc. That was the whole Esalen side. Maybe we'll tell that on when we go there, because that's the part that has to do with Esalen, and I'm not telling you that now. Anyway. So she saw my name, part of something that was happening out here. She called me in, So I went into Lawrence Rockefeller's office where I used to deliver shirts when I was in high school, and they were just surrounded by Matisse and whatever. And he was a wonderful person to talk to, and he asked me about body, mind, and spirit, and I gave the best answer I could. And then on the end of the second day, he offered me $5 million. So I took the job. But I had to, but I wasn't so happy about it. I mean, I was happy, I was impressed, and a little bit overwhelmed to be meeting Lawrence Rockefeller and get $5 million. But at the same time, I didn't actually know how to be president of a scruffy graduate school. I was chair of a department in a university that never changed. Nothing ever happened. We studied the curriculum for 5 years and made one change. Okay. So that was pretty new. We were learning on the job. Now, but he gave us the money with no strings. He improved the school. But it led to unbelievable arguments and distrust and it's all money, no, it's all money, no, it's all money, etc. And then we kept going along, and WASC came 2 weeks before I came, no, 2 weeks after I came, and studied us again. By this time the standards were up, way up. They'd done a whole new thing, etc. And so there were 9 standard students, board, money, library, curriculum, whatever, and we failed 8.5 out of 9. Yeah, I'm glad you didn't come then. I would be apologizing to you. You're safe now. And so we really had to hustle because they said, we're not putting you on probation, but you're in a lot of trouble. Okay, so, like that. Okay, so slowly, chaos, and also improvement, and growth, and a certain amount of some beautiful things happened, amazing. You can just go, wow, that's special. And then other things, just really bad. And that's the way it was. And maybe it's always like that, but maybe more so some places than others. And then, what's the tell? Oh, the end of 1999 was the end of my second contract, and then Joe Silviando and I went to dinner. He was a friend. He came on the board for me to help me. He was dean at St. Mary's and knew a lot about higher education, especially a lot about WASC. And he was a little horrified by this institution, and we went to dinner, and I argued that he should become president. Not that I could appoint him, but I could encourage him. And he said, oh, I should stay another 2 years, and we argued, and as I like to say, I won the argument, and that's been really good for everybody, because he really is a higher education administrator. I mean, that's what he's been all of his life, and I was really a professor who was, I wouldn't say I was acting as president, but, you know, I was doing that. Okay, so I went back to being a president and joined my very, very special friends, Rick Thomas and Brian Swim, in your program. Okay, now, that kind of, Joe's done a great job, Judy's done a great job, we've matured, we've gotten adult and responsible, and we meet deadlines, and papers get handed back almost always on time with comments, whereas in the past, that was not to be counted on. Okay, so tremendous. Now the interesting question, which I'd love you to join in trying to answer, is whether in the process of getting legitimate and kind of impressive, you know, people around the country know about us, maybe not in Kansas, but you know, on the other coast, they know about it. Okay, which my plane only goes over. But you can't say that because half the people here are from Michigan. I don't know why is that. How many are from Michigan here today? Not so many. Okay, but there aren't a lot from Michigan. Okay, that's just my regional parochialism, which you needn't forget. Okay, so I want to say that whether in our legitimacy we have lost a certain sense of mystery, surprise. How about this word numinous? Have we lost the numinous, the awesome, the fascinating, irreducible, sort of this quality of beyondness? Have we lost that? Especially if people come and don't know about the mission and don't really care. And they may be on the faculty or in the administration. And it's not as though you can give somebody a rule, a thou shalt. because it's very pluralistic, deliberately, intentionally, and wisely. But then what is it that you can say in a summary way that is representative of the pluralism that actually says something, and not just team spirit? Okay, so that's a big, interesting question problem, which I invite you into. Okay, now what I thought I would do is, no matter how tempted I might be to keep going on and on, I want to spend the rest of the time talking about Sri Aurobindo and the mother, because you don't hear this so often, and it is part of the spiritual biography. I don't know how I feel about DNA. It's such an interesting and easy way to talk, but it's not actually. I think there's something slightly mistaken about using clearly physical terms like delete, computer terms and DNA for something that's actually spiritual. So I'm not going to call it DNA. There's something in our spiritual biography that draws from Sri Aurobindo and the mother, and you'll see their photographs around, and if you do, take notice. These are the people who founded the school as a spiritual deed. They didn't just roll off a log. A lot of hard work and idealism and vision and maybe grace. Maybe they were connected to a world that's real. So I think we should be aware, and maybe even care about them. So I'm going to spend the next half hour telling you about them, and I'm not going to follow the notes. You have the notes if you want them, but you don't need to read them now. I'm just going to tell the story as I know it, and hope that it works through you. And then we have the whole second half of discussion. So, okay. Okay. Fall back to start. That's always a question. There's a long poem written by Horace called Ars Poetica, the poetic arts, or basically introduction to artistry and artistic thinking, especially poetry. He himself, of course, was a great Roman poet. And he's giving advice to young poets. And he says, don't begin with the twin eggs. Mean anything to anybody? Twin eggs, or from a Roman poet, don't begin with the twin eggs. Don't begin with the founders of Rome. Get on with it. All right? If you start with the founders of Rome, you're never going to get to your poem. Okay, so I don't want to start with the Bhagavad Gita, even though it's tempting, or the Upanishads, even though it's tempting. Let's just start with, or the Bengal Renaissance, which is fabulous. Ram Mohan Roy and Swami Vivekananda, or before that, Ramakrishna. Fabulous explosion of spiritual genius. Okay, all in the Calcutta area. Also Tagore. Okay, so that's amazing. Sri Aurobindo was not then Sri Aurobindo, but Aurobindo Ghosh, G-H-O-S-E, a typical Bengali name. Was born in 1872 in Bengal, Calcutta, son of a doctor and a mother who was apparently not very well. Was hysterical, maybe schizophrenic. And the father was a great admirer of British intelligence and science and culture, a little disdainful, as the whole Bengal Renaissance was, a little disdainful of popular religion, village Hinduism. I would say very disdainful. All right, all the gods and the elephants and the monkeys and whatever. And so he sent his children, once they turned 5, to the Himalayas to be educated by Irish nuns, and then at age 7 to England, where all 3 sons were educated in Manchester. And these 3 little Indian boys, no parents, and Manchester, England, trying to get an education. And they would have known English before they left because they were educated by the Irish nuns first. Okay. wasn't so easy, but Aurobindo Ghosh was very brilliant by any and every account, and in every possible way, and was then given a full scholarship to St. Paul's School in London, which you might know is one of the great public schools in the English language, although yeah, it's a private school and it's called public in England. Very strange, from our point of view. And was fabulous there as well, and all this time not going home. And then he was given a full scholarship to King's College, Cambridge, where he majored in classics and French poetry, and he was very fabulous. And then he started to get, around third year, started to get interested in British control of India, started to learn, teach himself Sanskrit, meet with some revolutionary type people, and then by the time he came home in 1893, at age 21, where he hadn't been since he was 14 years, to those major sevens, right? 7, 14, 14, 21. He came off the boat. There's a gate, it's called a gate, but it's actually a slab, a great huge slab of concrete, and the boats pull up in Bombay, in front of the Taj Mahal Hotel, which burned a few years ago, and you might have seen. And he then came off the boat and fell on the ground and kissed the ground. Said that he had now sort of reconnected with his soul, and his soul with the soul of India. He's not an ordinary person. So then he became terrific. He was immediately appointed vice president of a university, Baroda University, but on weekends he was a revolutionary. And he went around giving fiery speeches, and etc. You understand now, the only government of India was the British government. All right, and the Queen of India was Victoria. You could easily forget this, but try not to. The government was Britain. Okay, so he then roused the population, this is all before Gandhi, right, to the cause of Indian independence, and he saw himself as the major person in this fight. Who else was better educated? Who else was so brilliant? Who else was so everything? And he had this sense of himself and his destiny. Okay, and then in 1908 to 9, he was in the Alipur jail, charged with sedition and bombing. All right. And actually, he wasn't involved with the bombing, but his brother was. And I don't think he was all that resistant to the bombing, he just wasn't involved. And while in jail, he meditated on the Bhagavad Gita, which he memorized and recited, all right? And while there, he had an experience of Krishna. So if you don't know, there's a little catch-up. You do want to know that there's a great classical Indian text, a little bit like the Bible is to the West, Judaism and Christianity and Islam. The Bhagavad Gita is the revelation by the god Krishna to this warrior about whether he should fight the civil war. Okay? This Krishna, who is a god, appeared to Aurobindo Ghosh in such a way that he could see Krishna holding the jailers and the murderers in one embrace. It's quite a powerful picture that he was able to see. So that was a revelation or a grace, a gift. Then it was a great trial. We once had here, for our 25th anniversary, the grandson of the lawyer who represented Aurobindo in the trial, and the grandson of Gandhi. And they were having this great chat together, and the grandson of C.R. Das, the lawyer, said to Ramchandra Gandhi, if it weren't for your grandfather, I would be rich. Because when your grandfather, Mahatma, came to my house, he said, this little boy does not need all those gold jewels and all those stones and all this, that, and came away with a big sack full of clothing, and forever after, he then basically drained my family of wealth. But they did get independent, so maybe it was worth it. Okay, so Aurobindo Ghosh was then released, and he went to Pondicherry, Southeast India, which was controlled by the French. We loved the French language, and the French weren't hunting him, so he went to Pondicherry, which is now called Puducherry, P-U-D, Puducherry, and he basically just went there to meditate and write about his experiences. He was a very, very great mystic, yogi, etc. He knew this. Everybody knew this. He went to the #1 yogi teacher that he could find, a man named Lale, and Lale said, I have nothing to teach you. So he really, you could say he hit the ground running, but it's more like he hit the ground sitting. He just, right away, like that. And so he had these great qualities, and if you go in for rebirth, you know that he didn't just start with mommy and daddy, but had this long life, whoever he was. Okay, so then the next big event is 1914, when a woman who was usually called French, because she came from France, she was born in France, but her parents were Turkish, Jewish, and Egyptian. Right? It was the Egyptian Jewish? Yeah, and the mother was Turkish. They moved to Paris the year before she was born. She grew up with mystic visions and great experiences of the past, of the universe, of the cosmos, of beings, including many dreams of a bearded figure that would give her spiritual messages. Right? I don't know whether she called him Krishna. Don't know that this minute. Okay, but here's what I do know. When she, just before that, there's a great Russian, Polish, Jewish esoteric teacher named Max Theon, T-H-E-O-N, worth your research. Very important esoteric teacher. Anyway, he taught her. So she was groomed for something huge. So she and her husband, who was a diplomat from France to French India, the capital of which was Pondicherry, went and the husband, Paul Richard, went and visited Aurobindo Ghosh, and then immediately wrote back to his friends in France saying, my dear friends, the spiritual teacher we have sought, I have found. He is here in Pondicherry. His name is Aurobindo Ghosh. So then soon after, and I don't know how long, it was a day or a month, Mira Richard, the wife of the diplomat, who was obviously hugely significant, went to see Aurobindo Ghosh in this upper room in Pondicherry, and said, you are the Krishna who has been appearing to me in my dreams. And he says, it's just like a New Yorker cartoon, right? And he said, I've been waiting for you. Ram Dass has a great story like this. You know, he finally gets to meet his guru, and the guru says, you're such a jerk. Why don't you waste your time doing this and this and this and this, and you should have been here. And a lot of stories like that. So they then saw each other as their spiritual collaborators, and in the end, one of the great things about Hinduism is that all the great spiritual teachers have a great consort, right? Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, I won't say all, but a lot of Radha and Rama and Sita and Krishna, etc. So if you go to the museum, you'll see them all together. Very beautiful. If you haven't been to the museum, you have to hurry. Take the elevator up to the Asian Art Museum, and work your way down, and have a little Tibetan tea. Okay, so then the First World War started, 1914. They went back to France. And then the mother went to, she's not the mother yet, she's still Mira Richard. She went to Japan and studied art and meditation and all kinds of stuff. I mean, wherever she would go, she would meet the people to meet, right? And then in 1926, she came back to join Sri Aurobindo, and Paul Richard had his life in France. She had her life in the ashram. And then 1926 is this amazing year when he had this experience of Krishna, not now as a vision, but somehow descending into his consciousness. He calls it the overmental descent. I don't actually understand it very well, but that's what happened. I can give you the words. And that's when they decided to start the ashram, and he took the name, or somebody gave him the name, or whatever. I've never read how that happened, but he then came to be called Sri Aurobindo, Sri being a spiritual honorific, though when I edited the Essential Aurobindo in 1973, all of my introduction, all my writing came back with Sri changed to Sir, which is especially funny because he spent his life fighting the British. All right, they didn't have to finish honorific. Okay. We changed it back, honest. And then he changed her name to the Mother. Mother is an English translation of a Sanskrit word, Shakti, divine feminine energy. So he is saying she is somehow a manifestation of the divine feminine in history, in that community, and in relation to him. A lot going on here, okay? So they then worked together in 1926. Most of the people there were from Bengal. Some Indians from other places, and some Westerners, but at the beginning it was mostly affluent, highly educated, Bengali gentlemen and their wives. Not all of them had wives, so a lot of them were celibate. Okay, though when I went there in 1970, there were a lot of families, well, these couples. Okay, and then the next big thing that happens is 1950, when Sri Aurobindo, I was going to say dies, but if I were a proper disciple, I would say he left his body, which is language I used in the notes I gave you, because the disciples always say that he left his body. That is to say, he and the Mother said, if we're going to bring down the next level of spiritual energy, power, reality, force is actually a word they use a lot. Seems to be a very physical word. Okay, then this is not happening, what we're doing, so I don't know the exact word, but something like, I will die, and we'll work from both sides. Right? So I'll be in the spiritual world, you'll be in the human world, and we'll bring about this descent. Now, what is the descent? It's a great essay, which I've recorded for you in your notes, by Haridas Chaudhry in International Philosophical Quarterly, which is over there somewhere, where he tried to explain this. But all of Haridas Chaudhry's writings have something about the supermind. It is a little bit like what the 2nd and 3rd century Christians said about Christ, the Logos. It is a subtle spiritual transformation involving the whole of humanity, and maybe more than humanity, the earth, and maybe even surrounding the earth. It's a very large claim, picture, description. If it's true, it's big. If it's true, we should know about it, and it's important. If it's not true, it's very confusing. But then it's true of Christ too. Some people are really casual. Well, you know, a lot of people believed it, but well, so it seems like a lot of stuff going on around that. So, anyway, I hope you're invited into the confusion, which is a good place to be, at least at the outset. Okay, so then the Mother said that the supermind descended in her body, which enabled her to transform the cells of her body. Which would mean that if she transformed all the cells of her body, you got it, she would live forever. But she didn't transform all the cells of her body before she died. Some of the disciples were disappointed. I don't know how I feel about it, and you can decide how you feel about it. But she did, according to a 15-volume dictation to a man named Sept, a French disciple, she described what's involved in this transformation of the cells to make cells revitalize. This is not ordinary stuff. If true, it's not ordinary at all. Right? This is non-ordinary. Okay. That was in 1957, and the ashram continued, started to spread a little bit, not much. It's very elite. I mean, Aurobindo actually said, don't turn this into a religion, and a lot of useless people will join in and drag it down. I know. You know? So, on the other hand, if you look at something that is dragged down, you can regret that. So it's a hard, you know, where do you want to go with this? Okay. In 1968, the mother brought a group of disciples together. A person I actually know who was there. A person some of you might know, actually know about anyway, Robert Lawler, who wrote the book, First Day of Creation, and some other books. Very interesting man. He was there. And the mother said, if you go out 5 miles north of here, you will find a fabulous banyan tree. And this great tree where the branches actually grow down, and then up, and then around, and fast. I mean, it's like, you know, it's 3 times the size of this room. It's really fabulous. And that is the center of a new city, which will be called Auroville, City of Dawn, or Golden City, a utopian city, a city for the future, where there will be no rules, but there will be spiritual consciousness, such that you don't need rules, etc. And there's a chapter on Auroville in the Essential Aurobindo that I think you'll find interesting reading. Very utopian, but it's been a good story. They've had years. There were some years when the ashram, right 5 miles away, where the sort of the senior people lived, not building a new city but preserving Sri Aurobindo, they actually got control of the fundraising, so that the Aurovillians almost starved, and it was an attempt to drive out all the pot-smoking Westerners. Yeah, and maybe the Auroville needed a little upgrade in discipline, but that was pretty grim and almost fatal for Auroville. And then, incredibly enough, Indira Gandhi, who was a bit of an autocrat herself, intervened and forced the ashram to give the money back to Auroville and to stay out of their way, and created a whole new board. And it's an interesting story sociologically, and that's all I'm going to do about that. Okay, so now I want to talk about the yogas, which is what I want, more than anything else, is what I want you to take away from this introduction, because everything else I'm talking about is history that you might want to know and be informed by and lifted by. But what I'm now going to talk about, the yogas, is what you might want to actually practice. Okay? So, I just gave a talk to the strategic planning. And my job was to talk about the history, but really with a spiritual, from a spiritual point of view. And so I got a chance to talk about the yogas only briefly. This will be brief too, but we can talk about it during the discussion. So, the Sri Aurobindo means by integral, right? The same word that's in our school. And that the same word that Ken Wilber built his, one of his happening, with integral. The meaning is very, very clear. It means the transformation of knowledge, action, and love. Knowledge, action, and love in the context of the evolution of consciousness. All 4 parts, maybe 5, because you could say there are 4 yogas, not 3: knowledge, action, love, and meditation, which is kind of woven through the Bhagavad Gita. These come from the Bhagavad Gita. Sri Aurobindo was deeply involved with the Bhagavad Gita, which is only about 90 pages, but it's really powerful. And in the Bhagavad Gita, there are these at least 3 or 4 yogas: knowledge, action, love, meditation, and no evolution of consciousness. Except that the avatar keeps coming, but it's not clear that, anyway, I would say there isn't much of an evolution of consciousness. Sri Aurobindo also thinks there's not much of an evolution of consciousness, so he wrote the second half of his masterpiece, Synthesis of Yoga, about the evolution of consciousness, and put the yogas into that evolution change of consciousness, okay? So he said the new consciousness has to involve matter and history. A little bit like Teilhard de Chardin, Rudolf Steiner, and some people that you either do know or you will know. Okay. So, let's do one at a time. Transformation of knowledge means now to think at a non-ordinary level, to think intuitively, spiritually, non-egotistically, non-physically, to think with your soul life, your spirit life, to think in a way that is the direct apprehension of the spirit world. Hard to do. Aurobindo and Steiner say it's hard to do because of evolution of consciousness. We have developed skills that are the opposite of that. And the loss of our benefit is we're not so good at this. So it's really hard. The transformation of action is to give up ego action for selfless action. This is the part that Gandhi was so good at, and his reading of the Bhagavad Gita pretty much ends at the 3rd chapter, which is about selfless action, okay? Act without attachment to the fruits of action. Okay. But he doesn't pay attention to chapters 9, 10, and 11 when Krishna shows to Arjuna that he, Krishna, holds the whole of reality, all of the whole cosmos, all of the planets, all of the civilizations, all of the gods are in his consciousness, which he shows to Arjuna after he brings Arjuna through this training for, it's only 40 pages, but Arjuna must have had some capacity that was not yet realized when he started out. Then the yoga of love is the climax of the Bhagavad Gita. Interesting. Thomas Berry gave me a copy of the Bhagavad Gita when I went to graduate school, and I read it quite a few times. I've taught it many times, and I still was convinced that the Bhagavad Gita had to do with knowledge and action and maybe love, but my good friend Will Keepin, who is very wonderful, and I'd love you to meet him, and I'm always trying to do it, I may yet, is a very, very amazing person. He's a friend, a very, very close friend of Rick and myself. He has convinced me that I should have kept reading, because the last 2 chapters make it very clear that the point of the Bhagavad Gita is when Krishna says to Arjuna, love me, Krishna, as I love you. Love me, Krishna, as I love you. Sounds a lot like Jesus Christ and some other people. All right, so I think Will was right that it is the climax. I just happen to have a lot of interest in, especially when I was younger, in knowledge and action. But maybe I'm maturing and I'm ready for love or something like that, and I can see some passages that I missed or didn't take in adequately, whatever. But you have your own journey and task, see how it speaks to you. But I now think that Will is right. Anyway, not that I don't have books on my shelf arguing that it's about love, but I have a lot of other books that says it's really about knowledge or it's really about action. In any case, I'm really sure that it's not about evolution of consciousness, but that Sri Aurobindo, after writing essays on the Gita, then wrote Synthesis of Yoga, which has knowledge, action, love, in the evolution of consciousness. And that's in this school, and absolutely in this program. This program is big time about evolution of consciousness. We are the big picture people, and some people admire us for that, and some people think it's maybe not that important. And so there we are. Okay, now, so I want to do the Haridas part. So Haridas wrote a dissertation on Sri Aurobindo in Krishnagura College, where he was an assistant professor. Then he came here, and he continued to write in English, as Aurobindo did. 29 of his 30 volumes are in English. And Haridas wrote a beautiful English, not quite as flowery as Aurobindo, because nothing is, and on the yogas, and I with some really wonderful books over there by him. My favorite is the one on Sri Aurobindo called Prophet of the Life Divine. Another one is the Integral Yoga, which describes each yoga, a chapter on each yoga. Then there's one called Integral Philosophy, which is very philosophical, but sort of really one is yoga practice, the other is yoga philosophy. They're really good. He and I did a big issue of International Philosophical Quarterly, 1972, with excellent essays, including one by him and one by me. And that's what I can think of now. And I just want to pause because I'm only giving myself 2 more minutes. Okay, one more thing, or 2 more. Quick. One is the relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism in the school. The Aurobindo Hindu lineage, I believe, has become less present as the Buddhist consciousness has become more. Partly, I believe, it's maybe too simple, but I'm very sociological about such things. Partly, it has to be attributed to the Dalai Lama. Basically, the Buddhists have the Dalai Lama, and the Hindus and the Christians do not. You got Dalai, you got a lot. So that's in there. And sort of, I remember Jake, I just had my last conversation with Jake before he left to go to Cambridge and be even more famous. He said that he's thinking that Buddhism has become sort of the unofficial spiritual sort of assumption, consciousness in the Bay Area. You might be right. It's the language that you can always use comfortably and without opposition. All right? In that sense, it's really different from the Abrahamic religions. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon that the Buddhists really have emerged. And a lot of it has to do with this astonishing figure that we're just blessed to be alive with at the same time. And then, one more thing about the founding of the department. It really was the vision of Rick Harness. I didn't actually, I mean, I was president and I hired Rick, thanks to money from Lawrence Rockefeller, but I didn't actually know what he was thinking. I just wanted him, and he wanted to come, and what actually emerged was in his mind, but I didn't know it. All right? And it really came out of his conversations with Brian and David Delancey. David left us, but Brian, of course, is still here. And Charlene came almost immediately. And then, of course, Rick brought Stan Groff, and Joanna was part of this community before she was part of our program. In fact, she taught in the anthropology department part-time. But Joanna's this fabulous Buddhist systems, ecological warrior person. If you've not read anything about her, please, there's a great, great, great memoir called Widening Circles. Very wonderful read. I'm a biography person, especially among these kind of people. So treat yourself to that. So what you have, what you're coming into, is a program that's 20 years old. It has had, very, very well-known people come in and out. But there's been a core. Rick and Brian, the most core. All right, and then Sean came in *97 by a phone call from Rick. I came because I was eager to come all the time. I was president. That's a little exaggerated, but you get the idea. I came in 2000, and so it really is a core of people who really care about each other. And then as the ecology grew, partly as a result, I would say majorly because of the influence of David Delancey and then Sean, we realized we needed a person who really was properly educated in ecology. So we, after a 3-year search, we found Elizabeth Allison, who was sent to us by Mary Evelyn Tucker. So here we are. All right, and that's what you're coming to, and what, it will be different, I believe, when you leave it, because of you, and that's a good thing. And so, we have our guests here. If you're not here in the second half, I'm glad you came. If you stay in the second half, you're welcome. And we should break. The water has been perking. There's tea, but if you want coffee, you have to run down to the third floor. And we'll start up again at 25:02. Okay? Good. And Audra is going to start us off. 50.